What do we do? What do we do?
Are you running incident response tabletop exercises at your facility or with your organization?
No. No, we're not.
Okay, why not? Is it too complicated? Maybe you're simply not sure on how to get started, or maybe you think it's too time-consuming.
We have work to do.
Well, that may be, but it's important to understand that every emergency response plan will fail. Not necessarily entirely, but you will experience failure. The amount depends solely on how much effort you've put into preparing for an emergency. So taking some time to practice will have a possible future payoff. In this video, we're going to share with you 5 tips on how to put together a simple but effective tabletop exercise that will hopefully help you be better prepared, and of course, hopefully, you'll be fully prepared but never have to put it to a real test. So let's get started. First thing, number 1, the team, the players, who's involved. Well, I guess that all depends on who would be typically a key player in an emergency at your facility. If it involves the Health and Safety Committee, good choice by the way, then great, they should be at the table, so to speak, along with at least one senior manager. If you have a large contingent of personnel that have the potential for involvement, say dedicated emergency response personnel, health and safety personnel, these are some examples, then you should pick some of them. Ideally, though, the emergency response team should include some or all of your health and safety committee. So for this video, we'll just consider examples centered around an emergency response team composed of the health and safety committee and one senior manager. And this brings me to number 2. What do you practice? What scenarios do you do? Well, that too can get convoluted and complicated, so let's uncomplicate it. If you're using the color codes for emergencies right now, code red, code orange, code white, etc., then you can focus on those. But when you're creating your emergency scenarios, make them realistic. You need to consider your environment. Is your facility backing onto a large greenbelt? If so, have you practiced what to do in the event of a forest fire? Is your operation close to a busy highway? How about a dangerous goods spill? There are twists that you can add to your emergency response plan, but at the same time remaining realistic. Don't make those scenarios so complex that you need government bailout and all of the available first responders in your city to deal with them. But in the same token, don't make them so mundane that it won't engage and challenge your team. So stick around to the end of this video and I might be able to help you with some of that. Number 3, who thinks up the scenarios? Once again, what is your operation model? We're using the Health and Safety Committee model here, so how often does your Health and Safety Committee meet? How often for emergency response practice? Once you have that determined, well, split it up accordingly amongst your group. Say, for example, let's say your Health and Safety Committee meets monthly, but it's committed to practicing emergency response quarterly. Then split it up accordingly, taking turns with the task of making up the scenarios. Now, this being said, if you haven't created a schedule yet for practicing your emergency response plan, then this is a good opportunity to start planning. Number 4, and you're likely wondering, okay, great, how do we run it? Well, it isn't too difficult. You should set aside 90 minutes for the exercise. This allows for the exercise in itself and debriefing afterwards. Each member of the team will need a copy of your emergency response plan that they can refer to, and there's more on that in a minute or so, so stick around. The person that thought up the scenario will present it and answer any questions. Now, as I mentioned earlier, keep it simple enough that it's doable, but also complex enough so as to challenge the team. Present the scenario and answer any questions considering the following points here when you're going to create and present the scenario. First off, what are your goals? One should be, of course, increasing the awareness of the emergency response plan and the steps that each key person will be taking in order to resolve the emergency. Another goal should be improving your emergency response plan. You should be, in your scenario, allowing for at least one difficulty or challenge that is reasonable and might add some additional effort on your team's part. So, for example, say your alternate shelter station is under heavy renovation and is essentially closed to the public. Do you have an alternate to your alternate? This is often referred to as an inject or an injection. Injections help to keep the team stimulated and challenged. This way your practices won't feel as though they're predictable and a waste of time. So run your scenario like so. Present the scenario, have discussion around the scenario, answer queries that you haven't included that might be part of your normal operation. Say, for instance, what shift is it? Who's on shift? weekend, etc. Then inject your difficulty or challenge, have some additional discussion on that, answer any questions, end your scenario, and then follow up with the debrief. And this brings me to number 5. How and what do we record? Ideally, it's best to have one volunteer who won't be part of the scenario to take notes on as much as possible. Questions, parts of the plan that went well, where there were issues, and of course failures. More on that failure part in a second. Also, areas where there was time spent looking up for solutions in the emergency response plan or what to do next. As a colleague of mine likes to say, it's an emergency response plan, not an emergency reference plan. But having those copies available helps to spot and record areas where deficiencies lie and then recommend edits and revisions. So, some final thoughts. I've been a part of emergency response teams, even up to being an incident commander during some very difficult situations. And I can tell you this, it's okay to fail. But look at it this way, similar to determining your root cause, don't point failures to people. Look where the system failed. So for example, if one member of the team had difficulty finding what he or she was supposed to do at a certain point during the exercise, don't look at it as their failure. Look at it as the system has not included sufficient training to meet that issue.
I want to know about that tip.
Oh yes, that tip I promised. If you look at the description below, you'll find a lot of links and information, but I've also left you a sample scenario that you can use to run a tabletop, as well as a link to our safety segment section on the Continuing Care Safety Association website, where you'll find more copies of tabletop scenarios to get you started. These, of course, are built around the continuing care industry, but the process of walking through them remains the same. So practice, and practice lots. Until next time, work healthy, stay healthy.